Galatasaray.
Yeah, thank you very much for me. Oh, thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, welcome back. I hope the coffee has revived your senses as we have an interesting panel debate ahead. On a point of housekeeping, let me inform you that the print of the family photo we took before the coffee break will be handed out to you when you leave the venue at the end of the conference. And it's now time to start our panel debate. And the central question of this conference comes down to the transition to a bright energy future. And the following debate will further explore some important topics of this transition. And we are extremely pleased, may I say, to welcome three excellent speakers for this panel: Mr. Birol, Mr. Steer, and Mr. Seibesmau. We have invited Mr. Ula, an experienced moderator on discussions regarding innovation and energy, and he will lead us in this discussion. Thank you. And again, we aim to make this session as interactive as possible, so we invite you to share your work on this topic with us. I would like to invite those who would like to request the floor to do so during the contributions of our three speakers, like we did earlier this morning. And let me remind you how you can request the floor again. Well, as you know, please press the button on the lower right of the device in front of you to request the floor, and it will light up green. And please press the button only once. I would now like to give the floor to our first panelist, Mr. Birol. Are you ready? The floor is yours.
So, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Thank you very much to you, Madam Chair, for inviting International Energy Agency to share our views about energy and climate. Energy and climate they are very closely linked because 2/3 of the emissions causing this climate problem come from the energy sector. Which means, without solving the problem in the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to solve our climate problem. And today, when you look at globally in the energy sector, people, governments, businessmen, industry, academy, they have two major preoccupations. One, low energy prices, oil, gas, and coal. Why are they with us? How long they are going to be with us? And what are the implications of that for energy and for economy? It's number one preoccupation. Number two, COP21. Is it really going to affect the energy sector? And who is going to do what? These are the two major preoccupations. In the next 10 minutes or so, I would like to discuss with you what we think in this area. And just to put it in a context, Europe is a very important player, but was much more important in the past when it comes to global energy picture. When we look at the future, the role of Europe will not be a region which is determining the trends, but which may be affected by the global trends. So for that reason, I am going to try to put Europe in the global energy context. So when we look at the demand growth worldwide, we see that in the next years to come, the European energy demand is going to decline. It is in fact already declining. Compared to 6-7 years ago, for example, gas demand today in Europe is 20% less than what it was in 2008. The same for coal, the same for electricity, for many things. Why? Because Europe is using energy more and more efficiently, and European economy slowed down, and the population growth also slowed down. The growth is coming from the emerging countries and mainly from Asia. We all know the story of China, but now, just to bring to your attention, India is moving to the center stage of global energy affairs. India is coming, and coming very strongly for several reasons, ranging from the change in the economy, economic growth, population dynamics, and others. So, Europe is important, but the growth is coming outside of Europe in the next years to come. We are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, very low oil price, about $40. And it is not only oil. Gas prices are very low as well. The European import gas price in the last 2 years almost halved. In Asia, LNG prices, only 2 years ago, it was about $20. It is less than $6 now. And coal prices are rock bottom, $50. So there is a fossil fuel price in general very low, and one of the very important implications of low oil prices is that there are many colleagues here from the industry. Oil companies are now cutting investments, and this is coming to a dangerous level. We have seen that last year investments were much lower than the year before, and in the last 2 years, 2015 and 2016, 2 years in a row, global oil investments decline. We have never seen this in the history. If there was a decline 1 year, next year there was a rebound. And what does this mean? This may mean that in a few years of time, when the demand gets stronger, we may well have surprises in the oil markets in terms of oil prices. This is number one. Number two, in terms of energy security, something we all have to note, the bulk of the cut in the oil projects come from North America, Latin America, Russia, Africa, which means that a lot of oil, even more than now, will come from Middle East, low-cost areas, because it's only area which makes sense with $40 oil price, which means in a low-price environment, world's reliance on Middle East will increase. A region which is going through very difficult times, and I think it will be very optimistic to believe that the Middle East geopolitics will be fixed tomorrow. Therefore, the low oil prices brings energy and geopolitics closer together. And this is one of the implications of low oil prices. Now, let me come to good news. In fact, Minister Hague already mentioned our study. Global emissions, ladies and gentlemen, in the last 40 years increased every year. Only 3 times it didn't increase. When there was a oil price shock, when there was a collapse of Soviet Union, and the financial crisis in the year 2000. 3 times only, as a result of financial developments, economic growth collapsing. But we have said last year, and also this year, global emissions did not increase, even though global economy increased more than 3%. For the first time, economy is growing, emissions are not growing. It is happening for the first time, and it is happening 2 years in a row. Why? 2 main reasons. US and China were the main drivers of decline in the emissions. It did increase from South Asia, it did increase in Middle East, and unfortunately, I should say, it increased in Europe. CO2 emissions increased in Europe in the year 2015. So this is one reason that in some we have seen that it was flat emissions. The second reason, a very good news, especially who are believing the importance of renewable energies. Last year, ladies and gentlemen, more than 90% of all new power plants started to work were renewables, 10% all the rest put together. So 90% renewables, 10% coal plus oil plus gas plus nuclear, 10%, renewables alone, 90%. So this is definitely something which we can get, which we can be hopeful for the future. For the first time, we have seen 2 years in a row, emissions did not increase, even though the global economy did increase. But of course, the important thing is what will happen in the future. If it's a trend that will be with us for many years to come, or it is a 2 years, these are only good surprises for us. In order not to leave the things to the surprise, as Mr. Vice President Šefčovič mentioned, we made the analysis. What needs to be done in the energy sector to have a 2 degrees trajectory compared to what we have now? There is a big gap. Every country has its own energy resources, policies, economic background. Everybody is different, but there are certain areas, policies, which are common to all of us. 2 of them are very important. One, renewable energies, as I mentioned, in addition to hydro, solar, and wind, both onshore and offshore wind. And second, perhaps more importantly, energy efficiency. There is a huge room across the world to improve the energy efficiency. These are the 2 major policies that can help us to go from our current trajectory to a 2 degrees trajectory. And all other policies, carbon capture and storage, nuclear power, switch from coal to gas, they can all help according to different countries, but these 2 are must if we are serious to reach the 2 degrees trajectory. And there is one good news, another good news in fact. The cost of renewables are falling down very quickly. In the last 7 years, the cost of solar energy fell down by 1/3, wind fell down by 80%, efficient lighting, LED lighting fall substantially. So therefore, renewables are not anymore a romantic story, they are a real business case, and they are making sense in terms of bringing money, and in many cases, perhaps without even government support. So let me just in the last few minutes put my thoughts together. COP21, yes, it's a historic milestone, but now time to deliver, and in terms of EU, what I would expect is to have a clear, transparent sharing of burden across the sectors and across the countries so that everybody knows who is going to do what, so that there is a room for monitoring and tracking of that. Now, European renewable energy is growing very strongly, and it can grow even more strongly. We have to take advantage of the falling down of renewables and look at our renewable support policies, especially in the context of competitiveness, carefully. Maybe there's a need for redesign some of those policies. In terms of carbon pricing, I would have expected after Paris, carbon prices will go up because there's a constraint. Just to give you 2 numbers, before Paris, carbon prices were 9 euros, and after this big success of Paris, they fell down to 5 euros. So we have to look at this and we have to look at our carbon pricing scheme. Another point, energy efficiency, huge support in Europe. Europe has been the leader of the energy efficiency. If I can suggest one thing to my European colleagues, efficiency improvement in trucks, extremely important. It is time to Europe to follow the other successful cases, which was in United States, Japan, and other countries, putting mandatory stringent fuel efficiency standard for trucks, following those who have been many years ago set for cars. And also, ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned in the beginning that the low oil gas prices, it brings some, perhaps some profit for the oil and gas importing countries. But lower fossil fuel prices may complicate the transition to renewable energies, and it may make the life difficult for the strong efficiency policies because they are becoming cheap, much more affordable, and if the governments are serious with the COP commitments, it is a litmus test for them to stick to their renewable and efficiency policies. And finally, in today's world, when you look at the energy picture, when you look at Europe's 14% share in the global energy system, we should all acknowledge that no country is an energy island. 1 ton of CO2 going to atmosphere from Netherlands or from Belgium or from United States or from China, it has the same impact on all of us. So therefore, it is very important that the international cooperation is an issue on the top of the agenda of all the countries, and as International Energy Agency, we are ready to continue to support the European countries as well as all others in this planet. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If you allow me, can I go back to my slides? I have a personal 30 seconds of an obligation to make. I'm 58 years old. I'm a big football supporter. I wanted to pay tribute to this man whom I owe a lot. Thank you very much, Johan Cruyff.
Thank you very much. And thank you also for your last slide. Thank you for your contribution. Mr. Steer, I give you the floor. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. What a great honor it is to be here, and what an honor to follow my good friend Fatih Birol. My name's Andrew Steer. I'm President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. For those of you who don't know what that is, we're a global research institution of about 600 analysts and researchers and advisors working in 40 countries around the world, focusing on 6 global issues the world must address this decade and next: food, forests, water, energy, cities, and climate change. And they all relate to each other. Look, we face huge challenges in the world today, whether it's migration, whether it is terrorism, whether it is an extremely weak world economy. Everyone in this room knows that these challenges are almost unprecedented. And yet, over the last year, we've had a real blessing in many ways by a new multilateralism that is emerging. I had the privilege of being in this room at the General Assembly of the United Nations last September. Perhaps you were there too, when His Holiness the Pope laid out his vision. And then after that, all the countries in the world endorsed the Sustainable Development Goals. And for the first time in history, every country in the world had common goals that we were aiming for. Really, very remarkable thing. And by the way, if the world were to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals and implement them, even ignoring the ones on climate change, we would actually address the climate change problem. The SDGs and climate are absolutely linked to each other. And then, of course, and here they are, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think you're all familiar with those. And then, of course, we moved to Paris and saw something that was really quite remarkable. I had been in the original Rio Earth Summit in 1992 and watched the heads of state sign the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in that room then, there was a real sense of moral purpose. And then for more than 2 decades, we lost that. That came back in Paris. And it was a really remarkable thing. And as leaders, we need to seize that sense of moral purpose and to seize the opportunity that we have today. And it was very remarkable for several reasons, one of which was not only did 189 countries commit to action, But so too, 450 major cities said, we are also going to address climate change. And indeed, we're going to be transparent about measuring greenhouse gases. And in addition to that, we're going to have plans that are more ambitious than our nation's plans. You just watch us. And then in addition to that, more than 1,000 business leaders came to Paris. And 450 of them are committed to major initiatives on renewable energy. And 122 committed to something called science-based targets. And they simply are saying, look, not only are we going to do better, we're going to do enough. We are going to decarbonize our entire production processes. It's really a wonderful thing that happened. And the questions that these facts raise are three. First, why are we seeing this willingness to take such action? Second, will today's urgent problems prevent addressing tomorrow's important problems? And third, I just want to end by asking, will Europe lead? First, why are they doing it? Why are business leaders like the one we're about to hear from, Feike, from DSM, why are these business leaders out front, pulling the peloton behind them? What's got into them? And the answer is there is an intellectual revolution that's out there, and is also a practical revolution. 3 years ago, we set up something called the Global Commission on Climate and the Economy. And we asked two questions, it was headed by Felipe Calderon, the president of Mexico. And we have an economic advisory committee headed by some Nobel Prize winners in economics. This is not a bunch of environmentalists doing this. We asked two questions. Question number one, will it cost a lot more to move from today's low efficiency, high carbon world economy to tomorrow's low carbon, high efficiency world economy? Will it cost more, as so many are claiming it will? We looked at the $90 trillion that will be invested in infrastructure over the next 15 years. And we asked, what would it take to make it greener and low carbon? Well, it would cost more, 9 trillion more for energy efficiency, 5 trillion more for renewable energy, but we'd save 7 trillion from not investing so much in fossil fuels. We'd save 3 trillion by designing our cities in low carbon, cities designed around people rather than around automobiles. So it adds to a little bit more. Instead of 89, it's 93 trillion. But then if you factor in the fact that you actually don't have to spend the money on gas and oil and coal anymore, we get down to 88 trillion. Now, this is a very serious piece of work. No one has denied these numbers. So don't believe it if they say it's going to cost more. That's the first question. Will it cost more or not? Second question is, what will it do to economic growth? Because a lot of people say, yes, but it's going to hurt our economic growth. Now, by the way, when we say this costs less, it doesn't mean it's going to cost less for everybody, and we're going to have all kinds of transition issues. But it turns out also the question on growth is very important. Will climate action hurt growth? And that same group of world-famous economists analyzed this, and the answer is no. It won't hurt growth. On the contrary, they found that good climate action will force improvements in economic and resource efficiency. It will promote new technology. It will close the infrastructure gap because we can save $3 trillion in the cities of the world. It will provide, my goodness me, long-term predictable policy signals. Wouldn't that be great? And it will also reduce pollution and congestion, which are costing many of the growing cities in the developing world 20% of their city income. Add these together and you've got a powerful cocktail of growth promoting, forcing elements of climate action. So that's the first. And that's, by the way, explains why do you think Prime Minister Modi of India, when he came into power a year ago, and he said, not, I'm a member of the Sierra Club and I would like to really change the environment. He said, I want to promote economic growth. One of the first things he did, he looked at solar energy. He saw he had 3 gigawatts of solar energy. His predecessor government had said, let's really push it and go to 20 gigawatts by 2022. Prime Minister Modi said, no, we won't go to 20 gigawatts. We're going to go to 100 gigawatts by 2022. Why did he do it? He did it because he believed it would help promote growth by bringing in technology. He'd create a new industry and he'd change the nation. And he was right. So that's question number one. Why do? They do it because they're smart. Question number two, will today's urgent crowd out tomorrow's important? Look, the World Economic Forum, as you know, every year they survey 1,200 CEOs of major corporations and ministers around the world. And they give you 50 global risks and they say rank them. And if you ask, what are the biggest risks in the next 18 months? Migration, state collapse, interstate conflict, unemployment, failure of national governance. That's the next 18 months. Then you say, what are the risks for the next 10 years? This is unbelievable. Water, climate change failure, extreme weather, food crises, profound social instability. So in other words, these are CEOs, these aren't environmentalists. They're saying these are the worries about tomorrow. And the question is, will we, because we have these urgent short term, will we ignore the long term? And there's two reasons why we must not. One, if we want to address these long-term ones, we have to start working on them today. And second, if we want to address the urgent and prevent the urgent becoming chronic over the next 50 years, we have to address these resource issues. Look, Syria illustrates this very well. Was it simply a coincidence that in the 6 years leading to the Syrian war, we had the worst drought and the worst crop failures in their history? Was it a coincidence that in the 9 months before the war started, because of drought in China and fires in Russia, we had a spike in wheat prices which drove a lot of people into poverty in Syria? The military doesn't think that's wrong. Actually, talk to the US military or NATO, they'd say, yeah, these factors actually really matter. And of course, we know that with climate change, these are going to get worse. This is work we do at WRI. We look at the 15,000 largest aquifers in the world, and we ask the question, what are the water risks and what will happen over the next 40, 50 years based on IPCC scenarios and economic growth and population growth? You look at a country like Egypt. The estimates are there will be between an 8 and a 47% fall in yields in Egypt. At the same time, 30% of Egyptians work in agriculture. Population will double by 2060. My goodness me, if we think that Syria is a problem, what about Egypt? What are we doing now to help address this problem and prevent it happening moving on? Third question, will Europe lead? Look, the answer is Europe must lead because Europe can lead. Europe has been the leader in this space, whether it's the introduction of carbon markets, whether it's the fact that Europe hosted the Paris meeting and the headquarters of the climate negotiations are in Bonn. Throughout the last 20, 30, 50 years, Europe has led in the issue of sustainable development. But I do want to be honest with you, the perception out there right now is that the leadership that Europe has given in the past and is craved so much by other countries is perceived not to be quite there right now. And even just looking at Fatih Birol's numbers on renewable energy, consider sort of China, 2014 invested, 90 billion in renewable energy, went up to 110 billion in China. The United States, they also increased a little bit. Europe, which has been the leader on renewable energy, and we owe so much to Europe, of course, declined. And the perception is, for a number of reasons, that we aren't seeing quite the leadership that we gave. Now, Europe is blessed because the private sector in Europe and the private-public relationships in Europe are very unusually strong. This is an interesting a chart. These are United States. Wait a minute. These are United States. Green is United States. That's the wrong way around, by the way. Oh, no, that's right. So brown is American companies, and this shows the extent to which they are positive in their lobbying for climate action. And you see an F is very bad, an A is very good. Look at the green. European companies in general are doing a better job lobbying for right things. That's true also even of trade associations, which usually are a long way behind. So too, There is the United States, mainly Fs, arguing against action on climate change. Europeans generally doing much better. Now, this is a very, very good thing, and it's partly because Europe is so open and because European companies have understood better than companies elsewhere that they need to move towards a circular economy. And we know why. The reason for that is that the emergence of the global middle class around the world is driving to a shortage of commodities and a variability in commodity prices that we haven't seen before. So whether from 1 billion in the middle class in 1990 to 2 billion in 2010, 5 billion by 2035, smart CEOs and smart governments realize this is going to lead to a greater volatility in prices, and that's what drives the economic case for a circular economy. I know Feike will be talking about that because DSM has won, and he has won prizes for this. So let me not go on to this in much more detail. But essentially, this is the track we're on, and this simply symbolizes not only congestion, it symbolizes our lifestyles under a linear economy. I'm going to make one final suggestion on one issue, and you might wonder on a conference mainly about energy, why are we talking about food loss and waste? Because if we get food loss and waste right, we will actually demonstrate how to work together in a private-public sense, and we'll also take some pressure on what energy needs to do. I think you all know 1/3 of food is lost or wasted. It uses cropland, the equivalent of the entire United States, like thrown away. It costs nearly $1 trillion a year. If food loss and waste were a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, just after the United States. So no wonder the SDGs put forward SDG 12.3, which said we're going to halve food loss and waste by 2030. But at the moment, food loss and waste is going up. So recently, we set up, together with the Dutch government, a group of champions that are going to take this on. They're politicians, they're ministers, they're CEOs. You'll notice actually some well-known Dutch people down there, and Europeans tend to dominate that group because the Europeans are leading on that. And I see our next speaker is there, bottom row, 3rd from the left. So too is Paul Pullman. So is the EU Commissioner for Food and Agriculture and so on. These are people that are absolutely committed to make a difference politically, as well as practically in their own sphere of influence. This illustrates the kind of thing that is going to be required, the public-private approach to solving problems. The question is, will the EU really lead on this issue and really lead on some of the other issues we're discussing? Look, and here's where parliamentarians come into. Everybody wants change, nobody wants to change. Parliamentarians have an astonishingly important voice. I have the privilege, I'm a European, I happen to live in the United States, but we have offices in all the emerging countries and the developing countries. And I see the role that parliamentarians can play in changing the debate as well as setting laws, holding hearings, changing the hearts and minds. And my goodness me, people in this room have contributed so much to this area. And I would simply plead in this incredibly important year that we show the energy and drive that we need to show. It'd be nice to wait till next year, and I'm quite sure that your other committees from security are coming to you and saying, for heaven's sake, don't bother us with this stuff this year. We've got too much on our plates. And you have to say, no, this is precisely the year we need this kind of level. It's not a stroll in the park, it's energy. If we want to achieve the EU vision for 2020 of living well within the limits of our planet, we absolutely must act today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Steer, and thank you also for introducing our last speaker for this session, Mr. Sebisma. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatih, thank you, Andrew. Thank you all for being here. Most important, distinguished guests, parliamentarians all over Europe. Do you like it here? Yes, look around in this room. It was completed in the 13th century, 800 years ago. What kind of world did we have when we built this building here? We had a world less than 500 million people. And how were they living? Those people were living off the land, and they were living off natural resources. The sun, the wind, the water, the land. For the food, for the housing, for the heating, and later on even for their energy in terms of cooking, and later on even lighting. In fact, 800 years ago, we had a circular economy. And nature has found out already for billions of years that if you want to keep the ball rolling, you need to make it circular. Life itself is circular. And a linear process at the end of the day will bring you into problems. Well, today we don't have 500 million people. We have 7 billion people, even more than that, who share the same planet. Since the Industrial Revolution, only 150 years ago, when we started for the first time digging stuff out of the ground, coal, later on oil, later on gas. Since then, we changed our economy from a circular to a linear process. And we found it normal that we dig out and extract materials, and we process them, and then we consume them, and then we throw it away. And we found that a logical process. We dig up all the coal, oil, and gas in terms of energy, but we do it in other processes as well. And emit all those molecules into the air, and as Fatih Birol said, this happens at unprecedented rates. This cannot continue. This cannot continue because at a certain moment, those products will not be available anymore. Well, that can take still some decades, maybe some hundreds of years. Well, not for all. Second reason, at a certain moment, for certain areas in the world, for sure in this country, and for sure also for Europe, we will create a tremendous dependency on other countries. The third reason is at a certain moment the alternatives will be cheaper. And the fourth reason is the most important: this planet cannot take care of it anymore. We will get huge climate change problems. And I'm not talking about the water and the flooding, etc. I'm in first instance talking about the increase of the number of refugees in the world, climate refugees, which will create geopolitical tensions. So this cannot continue. We need to go back to a circular system. And we talk about scarce materials because we have not enough for ourselves. I have good news for you. It's not true. There are no scarce raw materials. And all of you think, well, circular economy because we have a shortage of materials. It's not true. Everything remains here on Mother Earth. There's nobody from Mars in the night who takes away our materials. All molecules, all atoms remain here. Okay, true, the carbon, which was underground in forms of coal, oil, and gas, is now mainly into the air, bound on oxygen, and it's called CO2. But it's the same atoms as before. And all the minerals and metals, which were well organized and structured in mines in Africa, and we used it for our cell phones and those kind of things, and then we mixed it with other garbage, and then we call those same metals waste, and we brought them back to Africa, but then in a form of waste. But all the metals are still there. And therefore, we need to work into a different system. We need to redesign our supply chains in a more innovative way, and perhaps use the CO2 in the air as a raw material, or redesign our supply chains in terms of use of metals in such a way that we can reuse them. So we need to do it smarter. And that means also that in terms of alternative energies, we need to develop them, and they can play an important role. Now let's look back indeed in how we came to this linear world 150 years ago. It's only 150 years ago, and we only have a few decades to go in this fossil linear economy. In 100, 200, 300 years from now, people will talk about us, those people from the fossil age. They had an idea they would continue forever in that fossil age. But of course, we find out that is not the case. And those poor people only lived for 200 years with that idea. Before we had a kind of circular economy, and afterwards we have a kind of circular economy, and you use again the solar, the wind, the water, the land, like we did before, in a circular way. More innovative as we did ever in the past. That is the world we are heading at. That is the world we need to head at great speed. And not, and like I said, because those raw materials will not be available anymore. Just simple because there are better alternatives. We didn't move out of the Stone Age because we were totally short of stones, but there were better alternatives, and we will do it again. We're also talking about quality of life. Quality of life, like the air pollution in, for example, in Beijing. We're also talking about the new generation, the new millennials, who look different. I mean, my father was owning a car, I'm leasing a car, and my son does not even want to have a car. My son, by the way, recently said, if I need to drive longer than an hour, 1.5 hours, to the city where he lives, where he's studying, I don't like to take the car. I would like to take the train, because otherwise my life stops for 1.5 hours. I said, what do you mean stops? Well, if I'm disconnected and not online, my life stops, right? So I don't like to be in the car, I would like to be in the train. So we talk about new generation who comes also and is more used to work on this sharing economy. DSM, like Andrew mentioned also, we have many projects in this circular economy. We use agricultural waste in the United States and turn that into green energy, reducing CO2 emissions with 80 to 90%. I need to say a little bit with a certain shame for Europe that we needed to exploit this technology developed in Europe in the United States. It was even opened by our Dutch king, but we exploited it in the United States, and that's also to do with you, with regulations in Europe. But also if I look to fully recyclable carpets, if I look to our new coatings for solar panels, if I look to waterborne paints, all kinds of initiatives with our company to move into the circular economy. But we have to speed up, and we cannot rely on a couple of companies doing this only because they believe in it and want to do good. I think all companies in the world need with full speed to work on this. And therefore we need an incentive, and an incentive is to put a price on carbon. And I'm stimulating you to take the lead together with us on this price on carbon. And last year in the climate deal in Paris, I think we made a huge step forward to put the foundation of making the next steps in addressing climate change. And now also in the spring meeting with the IMF and the World Bank spring meeting next week in Washington, I think there's a good momentum to put this price on carbon. Fitting in the deal we made in the COP21 in Paris, fitting what already Andrew mentioned in the SDGs. By the way, a small sidestep, the SDGs, the global goals, you know what it is, I assume. I see most of you nodding, maybe some of you not. Well, I'll tell you, my mother, my driver, my sister has no clue what it is. Don't know we have global goals, don't know what we're doing. It's like a strategy of the world where only the managing board is aware that we have a strategy. The rest of the employees have no clue. And I'm looking to you also as parliamentarians to address this. But okay, we have created the momentum, more with maybe the elite of this world, to address this and to address now climate change. A price on carbon, addressing fastly climate change. What will that cost? That change will cause winners and losers. That change will cause resistance. People, whether it is from the governmental side or the business side or some NGOs or some associations, there will be resistance. And I think it's our task to show this new world not to bend for this resistance and make clear for everybody any change in the world will create winners and losers, any change. But it's up to companies right now to choose whether you want to be in the camp of the winners or the camp of the losers. If you deny what is happening, I bet you as a company, and you can tell that to the companies in your country, if you deny this and do not act right now, in 5 or 10 years you wake up and say, where the heck was this coming from? Well, the writing was on the wall already for a couple of years. You didn't prepare it, and you will now belong to the camp of the losers. So the time to act is right now, to redesign our supply chains, to be more innovative with developing alternative technologies. But also your help, the third point, regulatory involvement, by putting this price on carbon. And the price on carbon, I think, is the way to split the intergenerational carbon bill we have, and not to put this as a burden of our children only, and to create a clear economic incentive for companies to address this point. Like our company is doing this, we use already for a year 50 euros per ton. At this moment, the price on carbon in Europe is 10 times lower than that. We use 50 euros per ton as a CO2 ton for our investments. And we address all our investments with that theoretical price and see what has the influence on our company and what kind of investments we want to do and what kind of investments we don't want to do. We are not alone. There are already 400 companies of the couple of millions of companies we have in the world, but there are already 400 companies doing the same. And facilitated by the World Economic Forum last year, we got 80 CEOs making very clear that a meaningful price on carbon, which is not 5 euros per ton, a meaningful price on carbon is supported by many business leaders. And in this April meeting of the World Bank, I will co-chair together with Cécile Royal from France the high-level assembly around carbon pricing, both of the private sector and the public sector. And I really hope that we make a step forward. Make a step forward also not doing the opposite. And that is subsidizing fuel subsidies and subsidizing the use of fossil resources, because that will be almost contradictory to what we do. Of course, we need to address more items like carbon leakages, like the role of the financial sector, who likes to have a price on carbon because they can trade in it. In the beginning, when Europe had almost a price of 20, there were already to third-degree derivatives developed by the financial world from prices on carbon, options on options. I think we should not do that. We should work together with governments, business and NGOs to tackle this climate change, to move to a circular economy. And especially also for a country as the Netherlands, I mentioned that before, also dependency plays a role. We think with our gas position in this country, and look to the whole of Europe, who's an oil importer, we made ourselves increasingly dependent on some other areas of the world, and the question is whether we should continue with that. Like Andrew mentioned already, economic growth can go hand in hand with addressing climate change, as the new climate economy report showed. Well, next to supply chains, next to innovation, next to regulatory issues on your plate to address a price on carbon, we're also talking about all of ourselves. We as a consumer, we as a voter. And I found it always so striking that the moment we are a voter, the moment we are a citizen, we know exactly what kind of world we want. The split moment that we as a citizen or voter turn into a consumer, we think, well, I mean, for this half hour when I'm in the retail shop, price would count. But tomorrow, when I'm a voter and a citizen, I will tell you again. And I think that tension, it's in all of us, and we need to address that as well. We need to switch from becoming a user instead of being a consumer. Because we all have the choice. We all have the choice where history will bring us to the future, where our children will live in. And what kind of stories we are going to tell to our children, our grandchildren, and whatever we had no clue at this moment in time what's happening in the world, or that we had a clue, but had the inability to act. And I hope it is not the later one. Because I said it many times before, you cannot be successful, don't even dare to call yourself successful if you live in a world that fails. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seibesma. And colleagues, I invite you to raise questions to our panelists by pressing the button, as you know. Now, Mr. Ula, I would like to invite you and our panel members to move up to the table over there. and start the panel debate. Yes, you can go now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, please. Come forward and then we can have the panel debate over here. Mr. Stier, to start with you, and then I will go also to, of course, to all your questions. So just press the button over there so you can ask questions. Mr. Stier, I love this like positive optimism about the 400 companies who are doing well, the 122 on your sheet. But what is your message to those others who are still staying in the camp of the losers, but saying, look at me, my company is growing, so I'm a winner?
Well, it is amazing how just really 2 or 3 years ago, most financial analysts, most people that invest real money in real stocks, they really believed that if you wanted to put your money in sustainable businesses, you would have to give up yield. They really believed that. They really believed there was a trade-off because they said, look, if I can choose any company, I want to be able to have the entire thing, not just the sustainable ones. Evidence has come out that is now overwhelming that actually, if you want to have yield, invest in the sustainable companies. So the message to those who are back in the peloton and not keeping up with these guys is good luck, but it's going to happen and you'll be smart to get up there quicker rather than later because your long-term profitability is going to suffer very badly. And I think the evidence on that, we do a lot of work on this, the evidence is now overwhelming, and I'm sure someone like that's running a company like DSM would absolutely agree.
Siebesma, do you want to add something?
I totally agree. Obviously, that if you want to run your company on a longer term basis, then you should focus on sustainability. It's obvious, it is your responsibility, but it makes also good business sense. Look to what the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, said. Look what our Dutch central bank recently said. From a financial stability point of view, they're very concerned about all our investments, the investments of pension funds into fossil resources, from a financial stability point of view. So they are addressing the point of Andrew, hey guys, please have a look, especially pension funds, where you invested in. I recently asked some investors, imagine that you can only decide on investing in things of 10 or 20 years from now. You cannot step out in the beginning. So you need to put your money now as a pension fund in issues where you will be invested in 10 or 20 years from now. Would you have a different investment policy as you are a long-term investor than you do today? And most of them said, absolutely, because I'm long-term invested, but I can still step out every half year or every quarter. And this indicates already that people really focused on the long term get nervous and want to change their name. The last thing is, you cannot find your employees of the future anymore. People like my son do not want to work for companies who are not addressing this.
Mr. Bureau?
I have a slightly different approach to that. So it's true that the companies who are active in non-sustainable business in terms of energy are not doing very well, many of them. For example, in the US, we see many coal companies are facing major challenges. And also some renewable companies are having good time. But in my view, it is too early to call for victory. We have to make the necessary arrangements in terms of market design that the investments will go there where you have sustainable returns, such as the carbon pricing. In the absence of carbon pricing, or governments make the mandatory rules, I am afraid that just me showing nice slides with colors and making good speeches, money will flow there. It is important to make the right framework in terms of carbon pricing or mandatory regimes so that this flow, which is very encouraging now, is accelerating and going in the right direction to meet the 2 degrees target.
Okay. And you are mentioning national governments. You were mentioning in your talk earlier energy efficiency. What can national governments do to reach those energy efficiency? Can you give 1 or 2 specific examples?
Of course. For example, the one that is very much in the EU context in the middle of the debate. If EU imposes fuel efficiency standards for trucks and SUVs, we can reduce the oil consumption. We can also reduce the emissions coming from SUVs and trucks. This is something this could be done. And I can give you a good example. In the last 10 years in EU, total electricity consumption was flat, didn't increase, even though at home, the number of electrical appliances, wash machines, television sets, air conditioners increased by a factor of 4, but the electricity consumption did not increase because there were very strict efficiency standards there. So it's a good example of EU, but we have to do it for the other areas, such as as I mentioned, a very urgent one, trucks and SUVs in the EU context.
Mr. Simpson?
Well, I want to make one provocative remark on energy savings. And please write it down in a minute, because all people will be dead if I get my right. In 100 years, or in 200 years, and you will all be dead, so I want to have it minuted, there will come a moment in time where we say energy savings, that is so 2015 or 16. Because look to the pricing of solar, look to the pricing of wind energy at a certain moment in time, and especially solar. I think in 100, 200 years from now, I'm sure that we look totally different to energy saving. Not taking away that at this moment, in the next 100 years, energy savings are not important, very important. But I only stress with this the importance of renewable alternative energies and how can it really change our life.
What is then the first step to take to reach that moment?
To develop with faster speed the alternative technologies, solar, wind, bio, etc. But with the low oil price of today, I mean, all those developments go a little bit slower. So this is the right moment to put a price on carbon. This is the right moment to put a financial, economic incentive for the world to make that switch. So I really hope that we get soon a meaningful price on carbon and do not spend all the time on carbon leakages, because even China is going this direction. The United States will go this direction at a certain moment, Europe, Canada, etc. So I hope we put a financial incentive that we are not only dependent on a couple of companies and say, well, isn't it our responsibility? Because it is, but some companies need to be helped by having a clear economic incentive.
Do you agree?
I totally agree. And you asked me why I was so optimistic. I'm optimistic about what can happen. Right now, I'm not so optimistic of what will happen. And Fatih Birol said something really interesting. After Paris, the price of carbon per ton in Europe didn't rise, it fell. What does that tell you? It tells you that investors don't believe European policymakers. So they watch the European policymakers go to Paris, fight for a 1.5 degree world, and if there's going to be a 1.5 degree world, we're going to have to tighten up the allowable carbon and greenhouse gases that are emitted. If you believe policymakers, the price should have risen. So don't blame the investors, I want to be careful as I say, blame the governments, blame the parliamentarians.
Blame yourself.
Blame us for not being believable.
Okay.
So this is a serious time for Europe, by the way, because
this won't happen, isn't it? I mean, look to Paris. I mean, this is different than Copenhagen. It was not top-down, it was bottom-up. I mean, all those plans were coming from the parliamentarians, were coming from the countries themselves. And we even initiated a review mechanism every 3 or every 5 years. So if we will not achieve our goals, that means that our own plans will fail. And that means that our own credibility, including those of political leaders, will be at stake. Will they put that at stake?
Let's engage the parliamentarians. I think this is the right moment to do that. First of all, let's go to Mr. Mohamed Mustafa from Kosovo. Mr. Mustafa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first welcome the spirit of this conference, which is promoting common approach policies toward building common and single policies and markets. But in I would like to mention something as a challenge. A challenge is at different starting points regarding the situation in different parts of Europe and also in different countries. And also the different starting point in the awareness about interrelating factors and awareness about how to move forward toward this common goal. For example, the coal lignite is considered as the most cost-effective energy source in Kosovo. But this, of course, depends on how much of social costs and economic costs and benefits you include in your analysis. But the life is this: many of these costs are not captured, or benefits are more evaluated. But this is a situation that we should see how we can build more synergy toward this common approach, having in mind this very different starting point in different parts of Europe, and especially in South and Eastern Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. Mr. Stier, I think maybe you can answer this question the best. How can we build those cooperation in especially the Southern European part?
Well, I think you're raising a fundamental question of how the Europeans, how we behave. The European Union has traditionally been a source of upward spiral of ambition. The European Union has made us all, as members of it, more ambitious. There is a risk now that actually it will do the opposite because we need a common standard. And one often, for example, at some of these negotiations, got to be honest, one looks at Norway and one sees, my goodness, these guys are able to be out there doing all kinds of things. So what needs to happen precisely, as you say, Mr. Mustafa, I mean, there needs to be a very, very serious analysis of how do we, as a union, work together. How do we, compensate? How do we internalize prices? How do we recognize that there is heterogeneity? And we need to do a better job than we're doing.
Yeah, I think your question is very relevant because you say, well, maybe fossil, more polluting raw materials are more competitive in our country, so why should we not use them? Well, why should we not all build cars without an airbag? It's cheaper. Or let me say more controversial, why should we pay for labor? We had a moment in history where not in all countries of the world it was common to pay for labor. I tell you, it's much cheaper. But we found it inhuman at a certain moment, and we made a law change, and we say slavery is abandoned, and we pay for labor. We pay for pollution. And is it not a step in civilization that we put the cost of the externalities and we put the cost of fossil resources and the cost for future generations, maybe the cost which we'll create by creating more refugees into our pricing. And then we will see automatically that our fossil resources are not so competitive. You mentioned it yourself.
You mentioned Norway. Let's take a question from Norway. Mr. Ola from Norway. Mr. Ola.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the introductions and the debate. I have a question for Mr. Birol. In your introduction, you showed a slide on how we can reach a 2-degree world. But that is not the Paris Agreement. That is to aim for 1.5-degree world. And to also approach and to reach this, you have to have a world that is carbon negative in the second half of this century. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit more about the role of carbon capture and storage, which must have a much larger role if you are to reach a 1.5 degree, and a much larger role also earlier on than was shown in the slide that you showed on how we can reach a 2-degree world. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Thank you. Right on time.
Thank you. First of all, you are right. Paris Agreement is below 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees was mentioned. I should tell you that the difference between 2 degrees to reaching 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees is not 25% more efforts. There's a huge difference, number one. Number two, carbon capture and storage is an extremely critical technology. Why? Even in the 2 degrees scenario I show you, 60% of the energy will come from fossil fuels. Less coal, more gas, and also some oil. Therefore, it is a must, in my view, carbon capture and storage becomes, at least some key countries, part of the solution, number two. Number three, however, when I look at today, the appetite for carbon capture and storage, it is really not very strong, and it is not correlated to the critical importance of carbon capture and storage. If there is a carbon price globally, which I would be very, very happy to see, but personally, I would be very happily surprised, it would be a great surprise if there was a soon global carbon price. But my all support and wish for a global carbon price. In the absence of carbon price, CCS needs strong government support, and today I am sorry to tell that not many governments give that support, even though it's a critical and very important technology to reach the 2 degrees, and if not, below 2 degrees scenario.
Okay. Let's go to the next question from Finland, Ms. Hanna Sarkkinen. Ms. Hanna Sarkkinen, Finland.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As speakers have mentioned, the price of carbon is too low in Europe. Carbon market is the main tool to fight global warming in EU, and it's not working, which is very sad. There won't be enough investments for green economy and green energy if the price of carbon is not high enough, or if the EU green energy targets are not high enough. So I would like to ask you, what could we concretely do with the EU carbon market to fix it? And I would also like to ask you, is the carbon market really effective tool to reduce emissions when you look at the history and the results, or should we focus into other tools to reduce emissions? Can we really rely on market tools, or should we use other regulatory tools?
Okay. Okay. What do we have to do to the EU carbon market?
Look, I think it's tempting to look at the European carbon market and say, oh, carbon markets don't work. But anyone who's studied Economics 101 knows that the price is set by where supply and demand intersect. So don't blame the carbon market.
Because it's a market.
Blame the fact that we are too liberal in what we allow. So the question is, when are we going to get more serious and set targets that are actually going to bite and get up to the kind of price that the Faikki is suggesting, which needs to be, I think 30 euros a ton, then it sort of focuses the mind quite well. So yes, it is very, very important that we move towards a carbon price. If it's global, it's good, but I agree with Fatih, there's not going to be some global agreement on a price on carbon, but how wonderful if we could get 50 countries, or you've got 70 countries, to say, right, we're count us in. And next year, by the end of 2017, 1.3 billion Chinese will have a price on carbon. Now, is a price on carbon enough? And the answer is no. It has to be supplemented by other mechanisms as well. But it is by far the single most important measure.
Single most important one.
Yeah, Andrew is totally right. I think there are two systems: a taxation system, well, you can set the price yourself, or a cap and trade system like Europe and China, etc. wants to have. If you have a cap and trade system, you need to think very much about how much credit you are going to give to the market. And if, like in the beginning, we gave a huge amount of credits also to those companies and also to those countries who didn't do a lot or didn't do anything at all, then a little bit of actions of those companies or countries to reduce created a huge amount of credits. And I know some of our competitors, I know some players in Europe who in the beginning benefited tremendously by this invention by the European Parliament or European Commission about this carbon trade. I mean, there were companies who said, this is the nice things to sliced bread. We didn't do anything. We decrease our emissions. We get a huge credit. We can sell it at $18 or euros per ton. And this is great. Now, with this oversupply, you know what happens, price goes down and those companies benefit less. So it has all to do with thinking clearly about how much credit you give. And with that, you influence, of course, the supply demand. And I totally agree with Andrew. We have seen many companies have indicated that if a price of carbon is not in the 20 to 40 range, let's take 30 as a midpoint, and maybe later on increasing it to 50 and above, then it won't have an effect. With €5 a ton, it has zero effect. So it is all to the European Parliament, to the European Commission, how much credits you have provided into the market. And you created your own oversupply. Sorry for saying so.
But Mr. Birol said no country is an island, but looking to the carbon market, you're still saying we can do it with just 10 or 20 or 50 countries. So do you really believe that we can, if you have an agreement with 50 countries, you can still change something on the global market?
Of course, and of course the carbon leakage is there, and people say, well, if we do this in Europe, then they will all move to China or they will all move to the United States. I'm not so sure. Taxation systems are even much more differentiated between countries in the world. And are all countries in the world moving to the Netherlands? Well, sometimes we think it, but it's not true. Are all countries in the world, are all companies in the world moving to Switzerland? Also not true. So, of course, there are differences. And you see increasingly, before you move all your facilities to another region in the world, that also China is coming with a cap and trade system. So I'm not so sure that we need a totally harmonized, preventing all carbon leakage things before we can take a step. And of course, it's helpful if we have a more global, more harmonized systems. And I think what we will do in the coming period is we will move step by step to that system.
Mr. Steer?
Well, some people tend to think if you put a price on carbon, somehow that's a bigger burden on a company. But, I mean, do it smart. It can be revenue neutral. We've known, economists have known since 1923, when the mighty Professor Pigou of Cambridge University actually showed that good economics is taxing bad things and not taxing good things. And I mean, it's truly astonishing that in today's world, when, I mean, you wouldn't find a leading economist, fiscal economist to disagree with this. Why do we tax good things like work and profits? And we don't tax bad things like congestion and carbon emissions? I mean, it's astonishing, but we don't. And that, interestingly, I now currently live in Washington, D.C., where obviously, you know, the Republican Congress is absolutely not interested in doing anything about climate change right now. But the idea of a carbon tax is not a million miles away. And some of the leading Republican think tanks are exploring this because it would be accompanied by a reduction in corporate tax and so on, so that you actually would get a more efficient tax system and the economy as a whole would become more efficient. So I wouldn't say hold your breath and expect a carbon tax in the United States tomorrow, but it's not as ridiculous as some people think it is.
May I just say one thing, 30 seconds. While we discuss on carbon price, we all agree it's very important. It could be the best thing to address this climate change, but there are many uncertainties. Let's do not forget there is a need for regulation of the government intervention in terms of efficiency standards, and also providing support for the good ones, such as renewables and others. So the carbon price discussion going on, but at the same time, let's don't put all the accent on that. Let's play the safe that we know how it goes, namely putting the standards and norms and mandatory regulations.
Multiple things, not just one solution, one thing to do. Let's go to Ms. Rosalind Scott from the United Kingdom.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for 3 really informative and at times inspiring presentations. I think we're all agreed about the potential benefits of moving back to a more circular economy, but it seems to me that we need a whole new set of skills in design and manufacture, in supply chains, and even basic skills of renovation and repair rather than buying new. So I wonder whether the panel think that the market will deliver those skills, or whether there's a role for governments and policymakers in making sure that we have the skills to deliver this.
Well, I think you raise a very important point, and I've mentioned that before. With target setting itself, Mother Earth will not be helped. Our planet will not say, hallelujah, we have targets. Our Earth will say, I hope that the emissions will go down. And therefore you need to have new supply chains, you need new alternative technologies. So at the end of the day, the solution is not by setting targets. The targets is only an incentive to have innovation, to have new supply chains, to have new technologies coming on stream. And you know very well, because David King, your senior advisor to Cameron, has launched this mission innovation, Mission Apollo, as called before, a collaboration between many entities, private and public sector, to drive the innovation. And I think we need to go that direction. And you see in the circle economy, you see that you need to collaborate between companies. You need to collaborate in private-public partnerships. And here is the skill, indeed, which need to be developed, because some companies, some governments prefer to collaborate alone, if that word exists. And we need to learn to collaborate along the whole supply chain if you want to build your circular economy. And I totally agree with you. There are good programs on that, but we need to drive this innovation, and that needs to go together with collaboration skills.
So it's not our business or government, but it's together.
Yeah.
Correct.
If I may, since you mentioned mission innovation, for me it was one of the most important outcomes of COP21, which aims to accelerate the innovation in energy technologies. So I would like to take the opportunity to invite the Dutch government to be a part of the mission innovation that many countries are already participating.
Okay. I totally agree with you. We are already discussing with the Dutch government, and I would like to stay also here with the Dutch representative here. I really hope that we will join soon Mission Innovation.
Okay, there we go. Yeah,
Well,
sure.
just to support what's been said, I think it's a terribly important issue. I mean, I think there's a huge psychological shift that needs to go on here. I mean, it is very interesting how the fact that parliaments in Europe have even started using the word circular economy, and certainly the European Commission has done the same. The buzz is out there. If you go to a business school now in Europe, this will be on the agenda. Go to Harvard Business School, it actually won't. The two words circular economy really don't exist out there. It turns out, though, exactly as Feike was saying, that actually young people today want to be part of this. I had the privilege of chairing the extractive industry group meeting last year in Davos, where the CEOs were actually very, very interested in the question of how do they position themselves 20, 30 years from now. And one of the ways they want to position themselves, they need to, is getting the word extractive out of the title. I mean, they'll still be producing the stuff, the same metals, but they'll actually be recycling it, so to speak. And one of the things they said is, so I guess Feike referred to this, actually quite hard for these companies to recruit the very best people if they're in the old-fashioned linear way. Now, in the United States, even though there are companies in the United States that are really doing wonderful things, there isn't that psychology within the business schools or in education the same way there is here. Okay. So please do it.
Okay. Let's move on. Let's go take a question from the Netherlands, from Ms. Jasmin Cegerik from the Netherlands.
Yes. Thank you, and I want to also thank the members of the panel for their excellent speeches. I would like to ask some questions. At first to Mr. Birol. You mentioned in your speech that we have to invest in also buildings and transport to make the transition to sustainable energy, but also to transition to circular economy. It's important to get more green cities. So I would like to ask what the role is of the EU in the retrofitting existing buildings to make them energy efficient and sustainable. And I have also a question to Mr. Stier. Would you agree that investing in renewable energy sources is just as important for the European economy as for the climate goals?
Okay. First question to Mr. Burrell. What's the role of the EU when you're talking about investing in like buildings or transport?
We use a big chunk, about 3/4 of the domestic energy consumption within EU and within the buildings. It can be the buildings themselves or the energy we use within the buildings, such as the electrical appliances, such as the heating and others. If we are able to put, once again, mandatory policies, mandatory standards for the buildings, then we can save substantial amount of energy, good for the pocket, good for the economy, and also reduce the emissions. But how will it happen? How can it happen? It can happen only if there's a carbon price, a significant carbon price, not with 5 euros, which I believe can increase or perhaps cannot increase. But what I know is that if the EU comes up with the policies with some mandatory rules in terms of retrofitting or efficiency standards, this will be definitely the case that we are going to see that the energy consumption in the buildings will decline, which will be good for the, once again, for the environment and also for the economy, for the households.
But we need those on EU level, not on national level.
Exactly. In fact, we discussed this, both the energy security and climate change challenges of EU. The single best answer to those challenges is building a single market EU.
Okay. Then there was a question about renewable sources, I think, for you, Mr. Stier.
Renewable energy in Europe. Well, since you're from the Netherlands, let me just say 2 weeks ago we brought our entire board, the World Resource Institute, to the Netherlands. And the reason we did for a meeting is two reasons. One, I wanted our board members from Asia, the United States, South America, and so on, I wanted them to see how the public sector and the private sector work together and how an institution like the Sustainable Growth Coalition of the 8 largest corporations in the Netherlands worked. And I wanted us all to learn about water management as well. What I wouldn't bring them here to see is renewable energy because there is work to be done, quite honestly. For the Netherlands, a lot more needs to be done in investing in renewable energy. And for Europe as a whole, I mean, the question is, why is China, why every year, I mean, do they invest more and more? $110 billion in China. Here in Europe is where the technology was developed. Europe led the world. So we've sort of lost our way a bit. It's partly because the way we subsidized energy wasn't the most effective, quite frankly. It's partly because I'm sure people from Spain are here. Spain did a wonderful job. Germany did too. They probably spent more money than they needed to. And so consequently, when the crisis came, we sort of lost our way, and that's a real shame. And we need to sort of pick ourselves up, go back to work and figure out how we're going to deliver those targets that we must do. And just one point on the European Union. We really do want Europe-wide goals, but at the same time, no nation should hold itself back. I mean, go further.
Because we are running almost out of time, and we have still a few questions here from Poland. Mr. Konrad Glebocki from Poland.
First, I would like to compliment our Dutch hosts for this conference and for organizing this very interesting discussion. I'd like to say first that the situation of every country is different. As far as renewable energy, we've made quite a big progress in the last years in Poland, but still production of energy relies very much on coal. And it is easier for countries in different situations to talk about decarbonization. Why instead of totally elimination of carbon, not talking about developing new technologies to use it in more efficient way in terms of energy production and to use it in more environment-friendly way, which is still possible with new technologies. And by the way, we should, in all this discussion, take into account also the possibilities of forests to absorb CO2. We have plenty of forests, and actually it should be taken into account in all calculations. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a remark instead of a question, so let's go to the next question from Turkey, Mr. Ziya Altun Yildiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the panelists as well. Since the panelists have also mentioned about installment of renewables cost decreased 1/3, yet prices of fossil energy dropped 2/3. Do you think countries and companies choose the easy and short-term win instead of the long-term one? And can you please a bit elaborate on what could be the driving force and tool for Europe to lead on and to put it right with the good cooperation with the private companies? Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go to answer this question, I will take the last question from the parliamentarians, and then we'll have the answers, and we can come to the closing of the session. To France, Mr. Pascal Alizar.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. I have a question on carbon and the European carbon market. The ETS seems to be a valid system, although the price at €5 per ton of carbon is still too low. But the market doesn't cover all sectors that emit lots of carbon, certainly not when it comes to land use or change in land use. And forests were mentioned just a few moments ago. A lot is at stake, and today it's very difficult to determine how you compatibilize the carbon. And what about carbon storage and capture? What do you think?
Okay. Merci for your question. Let's first go to the question from Turkey. It was a question about companies. Are they choosing for the long term or the short term, and how do you see it? To elaborate a bit on it.
So, if you allow me, before going to Turkey, one point, a comment on the Polish comment.
Sure.
It is right that we have to look at how we can accelerate the clean energy technologies, including how we can use the fossil fuels in a cleaner way. And this marries very well with the Norwegian question, namely carbon capture and storage. And this is one of the areas that we need to work together. And the mission innovation, this very initiative also looks after accelerating the clean energy technologies, new technologies. For the question from Turkey, it is a very legitimate question. As I try to say, I feel that the low oil, low gas, low coal prices may well slow down the increase of renewable growth, may slow down the efficiency policies, because bulk of the growth of renewables today, I mentioned 90% of the new power plants came from renewables. These are the projects which were sanctioned 3-4 years ago when the prices were very high. Oil prices were very high. And when we look at the markets today, to be very frank, I don't see any reason in coal and gas markets why the prices can go up substantially. So we will have a few years low coal and gas prices, and if the governments are not vigilant, they may well complicate the transition to clean energy technologies, as our Turkish colleague highlighted.
Okay. Then to our question from France about carbon storage. Mr. Sebesma?
Well, a few remarks on the first one also. Sorry for that. And it links also to carbon storage, obviously. I think, of course, sometimes companies in these financial markets have a tendency to look more to the short term, to the long term. But to address that, there is a responsibility for supervisory boards and boards as well. There's a responsibility to link remuneration also to sustainability goals, like in our company, and not only to short-term financial goals. An example is, of course, the share price of coal companies. I mean, 8 years ago, coal was in its high, and today several coal companies ask for Chapter 11. So in order to focus on this long term, it can go very fast. And I say you, the writing is on the wall that the world will change, a price on carbon will come, and if you don't prepare right now, then you will be world famous and you get your Kodak moment to be described in the Harvard Business Review as a company who did not adjust it on time. And everybody has the right to have its own Kodak moment, but I would not stimulate you to do so. Okay. And carbon storage, of course, could be one of the solutions, but there is a lot of things around it, and I would not focus that as the final only solution. There are a few opportunities in carbon storage, but for me it is much better to work on the alternative technologies than to focus on carbon storage.
We can work on both, in fact. We can work all of them, all of these technologies. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Steer, very shortly.
The low prices of fossil fuel are seriously undermining where we ought to be going. There's a role for government. Markets are not appropriately valuing the long-term benefits, and this is really a strong role for parliaments. On Pascal's question, I think he was also asking about, it's just certain sectors that we measure, that we reward in the carbon markets. What about forests and land use? The good news is now that we have the ability really to see almost every tree that is either falling or growing. We have a system with Google and others called Global Forest Watch, where you can go down to 1/10 of a hectare, and every single week you get an update. We now have something associated with that called Global Forest Watch Carbon, where we can actually see hectare by hectare everywhere on the face of the earth, using billions of points from satellites every day. We can see exactly how much carbon is being emitted, and we will be able to see how much is being sequestered. Okay. This could provide the basis for some very exciting developments in carbon markets.
So much passion in the panel. I think we can go along for another few hours, but without any injuries, we are already in injury time. So I really want to thank all of you, Mr. Sijbesma, Mr. Steer, and Mr. Birol, and want to give it back to the Madam Chair.
Good. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Oela, and the members of the panel and my colleagues for this highly informative and fruitful interactive panel discussion. Thank you very much. After this session, I expect that everyone is ready for some lunch. It's served in the Rol en Kelderzaal in the Hall of Knights. You've been there drinking coffee. I also kindly remind you that the information fair is going on at the lunch location, so please visit the representatives of the innovative projects, and please be aware there are two different halls. If you not have been to one of the rooms, I invite you to see the projects in the other room. After lunch, we will be parting to the Parliament for the various sessions, and we have created 4 different sessions on different topics, for which you already have registered a while ago. To make it easier for you to remember in which session you will participate, we have assigned you a color to each session, and these colors correspond with the colored sticker on your badge. And delegations staff members will not find these stickers on their badge, but they can escort their members or attend any session they prefer. And the first session is on energy infrastructure and security of supply. You can see it on the screen, which will be chaired by Ms. Jorritsma, member of the Dutch Senate, and this session has the color red. And the second session is on energy conservation, energy saving cities, which will be chaired also by a member of the Dutch Senate, Ms. Vos, and this session has the color blue. And the third session is about renewable energy sources, which will be chaired by Ms. van Veldhoven, she's sitting over there, member of the Dutch House of Representatives, and this session has the color yellow. And the last session, finally the fourth session, is on circular economy, which will be chaired by Ms. Mulder, also member of the Dutch House of Representatives, and has the color green. And this session will take place in the building of the House of Representatives, which is right next door. And members of the staff, civil servants, will be present to guide you to the various sessions, to the location where the meeting will take place. And could you please be so kind to follow the staff to the location of your meeting. I would like to remind you that all delegations members are grouped into specific sessions, and you will find also plates with your name on a seat in the session corresponding with the color on your badge. We will leave the Hall of Knights by 2:30 p.m. We will leave this hall by the exit through which you have entered this building as a group, and that is due to some security measures. After the sessions, we will come back here in the Hall of Knights for an exchange of the various sessions, so you can hear from the other sessions, which will be quite interesting, and we have a short roundup. But now, please enjoy your lunch. Goeie reis. Dank u wel, hè.